Welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root with Megan and Shannon, the podcast, where we dive deep into all things health and wellness to help you find health and healing inside and out for now and forever.
Hello, and welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root with Megan and Shannon. I am Megan Abbott, owner and founder of the holistic health practice Trifecta Collective. This is my co-host and head practitioner, Shannon Callery. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
So today we're going to talk about aging. And one of the things that bothers me the most, like one of the sayings that we hear, that clients hear from physicians that, I don't know if you heard this one, Shannon, but I've heard this one, is, oh, it's normal, you're just getting older. And that goes second to, it's all in your hair. And these things really just drive us crazy because while, yes, there are biological things that happen as we age, which we're going to get into today, there's a lot that is not normal as we age, especially for women. And, we're going to probably touch on perimenopause and menopause here a little bit. We've done other episodes specifically on those topics, but, so many people just hear these things and just take it point blank of, oh, well, this is just happens when you get older. And I also hear this from 30-year-olds. And, a little younger for a lot of these things to be happening. Well, yeah, once again, yes, there are things that change, and we'll talk about this. Before we really dive into this, though, one of the things I do want to talk about and just have a brief discussion is, things do start to change biologically as we get older. But more importantly, there's some other big things that often happen in our lives that contribute to some of these changes that happen that quote unquote as we get older. For most of us in our late teens, early 20s, through our mid 20s, especially for men through the late 20s, probably early 30s, many people are living a more active lifestyle, and many people are also have lower stress. Maybe they don't have a family yet. Maybe they don't own a house yet. Maybe they don't have a big job yet. And there are just less stressors for most of us in our earlier years. And that is normal. That is natural. There's also often more movement in our lives. We often don't prioritize sleep, hydration. Nutrition can be a little hit or miss. And a big piece of quote unquote getting older is some of these things just catch up to us, that our bodies just don't have the tolerance anymore. And then if we add in, once again, through our mid, late 20s, depending on who it is, into our 30s, life just gets more stressful. We have more responsibilities. We have more things going on. There are more things pulling us in different directions. And that also plays a really big role here. And we're going to not only going to talk about biological things that happen as we age, but we're also going to talk about a lot of preventative things that we can do that limit and inhibit some of these quote unquote things that happen as we age.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's one of the biggest things is it's so frustrating to me when I hear people say oh, it's just this is happening just because I'm getting old, or I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. I mean, and I'm going to be 32 this year, and I have even heard that myself from certain doctors about certain things. And I'm like, are you joking? I'm still in my 30s. What? Or just when anyone says that. But to me, when we talk about aging, and you'll hear this as we go through this podcast, but it's about taking care of yourself. And the sooner that you can start, the better it's going to be for when you get older. Because of course, like Megan was just saying, we do have biological shifts that are happening in the body. When we think about bone density, there's so many things that play a role with that, especially when it comes to protein intake, what type of movement, strength training are we doing? Like those are really big things. And as we get older, we do naturally have a shift in that area. And then of course, you know, in general, like nutrient status, when it comes to like minerals and different nutrients, those things are naturally shifting in our body, meaning we are losing some of them and we need to add more of them in and do different things to help those levels stay adequate. And then of course that can affect our brain function and so many things. So really it's just about like taking care of yourself, putting more effort into taking care of yourself. And then women too, like when we talk about menopause, perimenopause, you know, we've done a whole other episode on this, but yes, there are big shifts happening with your hormones when this is going on. And there's definitely things that we can do to lessen these symptoms and not have them be such like a horrible shift that most females experience.
Exactly. And I also want to throw out there, you know, a lot of people are just, and I saw this a lot when I was working with, and if you listen to my solo episode, I talked a little bit about this, where I specialized in advanced age population for a period of time in personal training. And I was working with mostly people in their 70s and 80s, and almost everyone was on blood pressure medication, on cholesterol medication.
Yep.
And even people, honestly, I mean, I've heard this almost a dozen times at this point that this, I think, just happens for a lot of people. And I don't know what they're teaching in medical school about this, but, a lot of these people are just at a certain age. Physicians just put people on cholesterol meds, whether they have high cholesterol or not. And we will talk about cholesterol today, especially as we get older in women, because this is a big change and this is a big shift between Western medicine and functional medicine. But you'll just randomly put on cholesterol medication, being like, at some point your body no longer handles this and we have to put you on cholesterol medication. And even if your numbers are in normal physician range, which we also disagree with in that range, that you still have to be put on medication. And that it's just mind-blowing to me. No, our bodies know what to do. And yes, I understand where medication has a time and a place for some people. And just randomly putting people on, being like, okay, after the age of whatever it is, you're just on cholesterol medication for the rest of your life. And this was, I've heard this from people more in the holistic still Western medicine space, but in the more holistic style space. I just, it really blows my mind. So I'm really excited to talk about this. And, and even, as Shannon mentioned, so as a female in our 30s, we're both in our 30s at this point, we're already preparing for menopause. And that has so much benefit and so much value. And by the time we hit the age where we start really going through that transition, and I can say this from experience because I was already in perimenopause, it can be real rough. And there's so much that we can do to prepare for these things. And it does take a little bit of time. It does take a little bit of effort. And the benefits are huge. And one of the things I always think about when it comes to a lot of this, especially aging, is we only get one body. We probably want to take care of it because most of us live a good chunk of time. And there's a lot of things that we can prevent, limit, and inhibit through some really simple nutrition, lifestyle, movement choices that we make throughout our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's different. It's a different lifestyle that I think is slowly, very, very slowly becoming more of the norm, to just like live a more like low toxin self-care lifestyle in general. I know that it feels like really scary to a lot of people just because it's so different, and it also kind of goes against things that maybe we thought were right that we know now were not super accurate and maybe doing a little bit of harm to our body. So just like being an advocate for yourself, for starters, Megan just mentioned like this whole cholesterol thing. As we age, they just kind of put us on it. Like, be an advocate for yourself. Dive in, do some research, ask questions before you just let someone say, hey, this is what's best for you. I think that's a big part of this. And then just like those daily lifestyle changes, and this can look like so many different things, which we're going to start to talk about here, but it's a shift, but it's a good one that's going to set you up to be in a really good place as you age and get older.
Yeah. So let's start with some like really just physical things that are pretty blatant and obvious. And Shannon already brought this up. So as we get older, we lose bone density and we lose muscle mass. That is just, it happens. It is natural. That it's designed to happen in our body. It is normal. And there's a lot of things that we can do to prevent this and limit this. I'll also say once again, as as a personal trainer and as someone who works with an elder, advanced age is what they were, the technical term was. And I think they determined that over 60 was technically advanced age. In that, we also lose balance. And so I'd say like bone density, muscle mass, and balance are really big, like 3 big areas that are just naturally happening in our body. And once again, women, this happens to us sooner. We lose bone density, we lose muscle mass sooner. A lot of that's because we're biologically, we're not built with as much.
Yep.
And it takes a lot of effort. And same thing, once again, I talked about some of the differences between men and women, biological men and women, when we talk about physical composition, bone density, muscle mass in particular. Men are born with more muscle mass, and their hormones are designed their bodies for more muscle mass. They can be leaner from a health perspective. They can be leaner. Women should not be as lean as, men, technically speaking. And there's a lot of variations within that for sure too. And we are designed to have more body fat and less muscles. And that is a biological thing. And so sometimes us as women, we need to take some extra measures to make sure we're not really losing as much bone density, muscle mass, improving our balance as men. And that's just something that we have to do.
Yeah. And I think the balance thing, I feel like that, yes, it's 100% true from a biological standpoint, but realistically, when we look at most people, male or female, balance is something that I feel like as a whole, everyone could be doing, like making a little bit more of a priority, just because it helps so much when you're aging and getting older. I mean, that was a huge thing with my grandma. She passed away, I think, when she was like 83, but this is like the craziest thing to me. She was in her like 80s, probably maybe late 70s at this point. But I don't know if you've ever seen like that broom trick where you like hold a broom out and you can like jump over it essentially. My grandma, this elderly lady, because she was still kicking, she could do that like way late in her lifetime. And I was like, wow, you really prepared yourself in the balance element here. In the majority of her life, like she was able to live on her own, do things on her own. Like she was pretty good in that area. So I think like just that balance piece is such a big thing. And there's so many ways that we have access to this. Like you don't even need to go to like a group class necessarily. There's so much free like yoga, Tai Chi classes like that we can find on YouTube. And it doesn't need to be like some long thing, just starting with small increments, maybe like 5 or 10 minutes, a couple times a week. And then if you like it, kind of amping it up. That's something really easy that you can do to help with balance. And it doesn't have to be like, when I say yoga, I think some people might think there's like some crazy types of yoga out there with like crazy poses. It's really just like the basic stuff in starting to build that strength and balance in your body to help you out.
Yeah. And one of the simplest things I used to tell my advanced age clients was when you're doing dishes, when you're cooking, when you're putting things away, can you do it on one leg? And can you just try and do some of the things that you're just naturally doing in your life when you're standing, brushing your teeth? Can you stand on one leg? And that, I mean, that doesn't involve any exercise. It's just what you are normally and naturally doing, but we're adding a little bit of a balance element to it to really start improving this. And I do think a big piece of this for many women, and once again, I do think, yes, I think it's both across the board. And I think sometimes women tend to be worse off. And a lot of this goes back to pelvic floor health. And most women, when they have a child, and, a lot of women decide to have children, they don't do anything for pelvic floor work. And we have a lot of pelvic floor dysfunction. In my personal opinion, after a woman has a baby, it should be free and covered by insurance to have pelvic floor PT for a whole year, at least. Man, would that make such a big difference in so many women's lives after, postpartum, and just like going once a month of just like having some of that pelvic floor work done. And I do think, by the way, I've seen a couple pelvic floor physical therapists, and they were wonderful. And I've never had children. I've never been pregnant. So much value. And if you have a history of chronic bloating issues, you have pelvic floor issues, just by the way. So these are really important things. Men can benefit from pelvic floor physical therapy, and pelvic floor, it's not just your Kegels. It's not, just doing that. It's really your deeper abdominal muscles. And you think like the lower belly piece, it's really like control and contraction with those inferior transverse abdominis, which are on the side of your belly. And once again, these are just the deeper muscles into like obliques and what is the balance. And a lot of pelvic floor physical therapists from, who I've spoken to, they do internal, external exams. My pelvic floor physical therapist that I saw for over a year would have me do muscle contractions and do an ultrasound. And we'd see like what's actually working, what's not working, what's overworking. Is there an imbalance between the left and the right side? And like crazy amounts of information. And it was so helpful and like blew my mind. The only type of physical therapy that I actually saw benefit from and was really, really impressed from. So that also, I don't think that's a bad idea for anyone, just to do a simple initial consultation, check in, have an exam done by a pelvic floor physical therapist and see if you do have any imbalances. And they'll usually give you some stretches and or exercises to help you rebalance that pelvic floor.
Yeah, pelvic floor therapy. I'm glad you brought that up. That's because it's not something that is talked about super often. I also went through it too, and it was really helpful. And it can go either way. Like you can either be like too tense or too tight, contracting too much in certain areas, or maybe not contracting enough. That was, for me, I ventured into that on my constipation journey, when I was just like trying to figure it out. And it definitely did help, because I was a person who was just like all around constricted, which then led me to more of the nervous system stuff and all of that. But yeah, it's, I certainly agree that like, I have never been pregnant, never had kids, not yet, but that would absolutely be something that I would do when that time comes, because we need that area of the body can be neglected. It's just not like the main focus. And there's huge impacts when we have everything in balance in that area.
Yeah. And I will say, just because my pelvic floor physical therapist and I talked about this a lot and laughed a lot about this, but if you are someone, and once again, speaking mostly to women, because I do see women doing this more, if you're one of those women who constantly sucks in your belly a little bit, you definitely have pelvic floor issues, because that is not how this should work. So, it's not good to just be sucking in all the time. And there's really, they do such a good job at looking at all the little tiny muscles and really helping. Once again, this is just my experience of like really educating you. And if you ask questions, once again, I was already in the health space at this point in time, and I would just ask all types of questions for like the full hour. I was with my pelvic floor physical therapist, and just like getting her feedback on stuff. Just ask questions. They are a wealth of knowledge, and it's just an area of the body that we just don't talk about.
Yeah, and for so many females, that area in particular, like kind of like your sacral chakra, like there's so many things that go along with this as well. So and like to loop it back to where we started from, just like the balance piece, like, you know, playing a role with like your hips and so many things. So by and large, balance is a really, really big area that is worth the focus as we age. You know, even being like in my 30s, I can tell when I don't take enough time to, you know, maybe focus on my balance, my stretching, whatever that may look like. I can definitely tell when I don't focus on that area. So it's just a really important piece to this. And then I think something else too is, I'm not trying to call out runners because I know that everyone has their thing. Certain people like running, but I cannot tell you how many times I have come across like, you know, high intensity runners, interval training people, for some reason. And this might just be my personal opinion, Megan, you may have seen the same thing too, but like when they start to age and get older, these are the people that are presenting with more of the muscle pain, maybe being diagnosed with like certain types of arthritis and whatnot. And it's about being more gentle on your body too. It's not like you have to completely stop doing that stuff, but at some point there needs to be a shift of just being slightly more gentle with your body and not so intense. That can go a long way.
I'm also going to throw CrossFit in here. I can't tell you the number of people I think CrossFit by and large, depending, and there's a lot of ways to do CrossFit. So I'm not bashing CrossFit in general. If you go to a CrossFit place that focuses on lifting as much weight as you can, as quickly as you can, that's the issue. And I mean, the number of people, dozens and dozens of people in their late 30s into their 40s who were doing CrossFit, got hurt, and then there was a whole host of all kinds of issues. And the issue really comes in to this consistent and a really hard impact on your body. So if we think about running, you're just, running one foot in front of the other. And if you're running a lot, that's a lot of consistent and same impact on the body. And once again, it's like eventually some of these things just catch up to you. Now, if you're running once a week and then you're doing some yoga, some additional strength training, like rebalancing type work on the other days, by and large, I think probably most people would be okay, assuming like sleep is good, nutrition's okay, some of the other factors are there. So it's not that these things necessarily are bad. It's a lot of the repetitive, intense motions can really start to get to you. And I'll also say, I've talked to people who were really big into strength training and they're, after 60, they're like, oh, can't squat anymore, can't deadlift anymore. And it's because they can't squat or deadlift 400, 500 plus pounds, which of course, yeah, you shouldn't be lifting that much weight. And it doesn't mean that there isn't still value in doing squat variations, squatting. You can still barbell squat. Should you squat 400 pounds at the age of 60 or 70 all the time? Probably not. If you have a long history and you're trying to PR, every once in a while, it's different. But if you're trying to do that every single week, it probably is going to catch up to you. And the other thing that I really think is really important is it's just a variety of movement patterns. Even a lot of people, if you're only running, if you're only doing yoga, if you're only strength training in the front and back planes, once again, squat, deadlift, bench, row, and you're not training anything laterally, side to side, if you're not training any twisting patterns, if you're not focusing on one of the big things that happens is you stop being able to reach overhead. And it's because you just stop doing that on a consistent basis because maybe your shoulders hurt just a little bit because your rotator cuffs, you didn't strength train properly. And so you can no longer kind of come up and overhead. But even just training that, can you rotate with that? All of these things, we should be able to maintain these motions. And if you don't train it, you'll lose it, and that is a real thing. If you stop doing something, yeah, you're gonna lose it, especially as you age. And this is why for me, like having this baseline of resistance training, whether that's weights or bands or, whatever it is, and training a lot of different motions. And once again, in the episode last week, I talked about like being able to sit on a toilet and stand back up. Like that's why squatting is important. If you want us to continue to be able to pick something up off the floor, like that's why deadlifting is important. These like really basic movements. And we also need to look at, the number of people I've seen get hurt doing a twisting motion in their 40s. I can't tell you the number. And it's because, guess what? You stop twisting and you just like don't do that on a regular basis. And then you do it real quick. Your body doesn't remember this anymore. Versus when you were 20, yeah, as a kid, you were running around and doing all kinds of things and, twisting and whatever you were doing as that kids do. And just as an adult, you don't do that anymore. And so we need to be a little bit more conscious of these things that we maybe used to be doing or we could get away with doing when we were young because our body was still young and it still had, some place to be, some room for error. And that room for error just gets a lot smaller as we get older. So those are just all some things to think about.
Yeah. And then by and large, like when we're talking about, losing bone density as we age, truthfully, doing some sort of like strength training and making sure you're switching it up to target different areas, like, these balance things like we just talked about, standing on one leg while you're trying to put on your shoes, you're doing the dishes, whatever it is. Those types of things are going to be much more effective than just taking a supplement. I mean, there are definitely certain supplements that we're going to talk about that are helpful that we might want to increase. But like, I know like everyone, one of the big questions that we get asked is like, well, what type of calcium supplement? Is there a calcium supplement that's going to help with my bones? And we're always going to lean more towards this more type of physical movement as opposed to just taking a calcium supplement to help with like bone density and bone strength.
Yeah, and I can't tell you the number of people I've worked with, particularly women who are diagnosed with osteopenia or osteoporosis. We did not add in one single supplement. The only changes we did were 1 to 2 days of strength training a week, and we added more protein to their diet. That is the only changes we did. And every time someone followed that advice, the osteopenia and or osteoporosis was completely, I'm not talking slightly, talking 100% reversed. And this is over a dozen case studies from just me personally. And I've heard this across the board. And there are studies that have now come out about this. So the resistance training piece is fundamental as we age. And if you're doing yoga, like, look, like it's not the same. It's not, I'm sorry to burst your bubble. I'm not saying yoga's bad. And if you're in your 40s or 50s, I cannot recommend adding one day, 20 to 30 minutes minimum of just some basic resistance training. And man, will that make a difference in your life long term. And if you wait until you are already like, and if you've been doing, once again, I've seen this so many cases of, yogis doing yoga for 10, 20, 30 plus years. And then they start to hurt at some point in time. And once again, like they might be thin, they might visually look good, but they don't have a lot of control over their body. The body awareness isn't there. The strength isn't there. They might have like a lot of joint issues. Once again, like they may have been diagnosed like osteopenia, osteoporosis kind of things. And it's because we do need the resistance training piece in there. And once again, yoga's great, walking's great, Pilates great, all of these things, every modality has a time and a place. And if you're going to pick one thing, resistance training is that thing for overall long-term health. Because here's the other piece of this. If we think about type 2 diabetes, that impacts a lot of people. If we think about like Alzheimer's, the studies are quite clear now that these are metabolic issues, not necessarily, Alzheimer's is not a cognitive issue. Like strength training has a lot of value in regulating blood sugar and helping regulate hormones, insulin levels. there's just so much value in this. And I talked once again last week about, heart health and cardiac health, and not saying cardio doesn't have a time and a place, because it does. And strength training is shown now in studies to have just as big of an impact on heart health as cardiovascular work.
I love that. I love that that's like we're actually seeing that in some of the studies now, because that's such a big piece. And then, I mean, spinning off of what you just said, like talking about diabetes and kind of like, metabolic health and whatnot, food also plays a role here. Like, we want to do our best to be eating real foods, just like lessening our amount of really processed foods, really processed sugar, getting enough good quality protein in, good quality fats. Oh my God, does so much for the body, especially when we think about like hormones, building hormones, our brain health. Like, we need fats, good quality fats, for so many functions in the body. So that's like a really huge piece to this. So, we can, we see this happen a lot, or I've seen it happen a lot, where I see people just focusing on one side and maybe not so much the other. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've heard like, I'm just going to make sure like I get to the gym 4 or 5 days a week, and then I feel like I can eat whatever I want. Well, sorry to burst your bubble on that one, but what you're actually putting in your body absolutely matters. Like, it's not only about working out. The food portion is really, really important too, because like we mentioned in the beginning, like in general, we want to be lessening our toxin load in the body. So there's lots of like, highly inflammatory, like seed oils is a big one that comes to mind. Just like chemicals in general, dyes, different things that we don't even know what they are that get put in our food. So it's important to be aware of that side of things as well in what we're actually putting into our body.
Yeah. And if you only start in one area, and I know we talk about this all the time, protein intake, starting your day with protein, having protein at every single meal. Yes, there are benefits in eating animal protein over plant-based protein. There's plenty of research on this. And if you see studies that show otherwise, please dig a little bit deeper into who ran the study and how the study was run. Not saying all the animal, protein studies are great. I'm not saying that. And they're a whole lot better by and large than a lot of the plant-based ones out there. And once again, protein is so good for bone density, for muscle mass, for metabolic health. And then also if we think about gut health, a lot of people as they get older start to have a lot of gut issues. And a lot of this goes into what they put in their body, the stress load that they're experiencing, and how they manage that stress. And protein, especially animal-based protein, helps to stimulate that stomach acid production, which is a huge protectant against gut overgrowth issues, against toxin overload issues, and just for overall proper digestion to get all of your nutrients. So that's a really, really, really important thing as well that is often missed. And for women, this really starts at like 30. So, if you start at 50, you have a lot of ground to make up for. Just a heads up, not saying you can't. And there's just a few other layers that we may have to go through to get your body back into more of a baseline kind of status to start to build it. The other thing that, we're not anti, like, you can have sugar, like, in limited quantities. It's not about restricting. It's really about fueling your body. The other piece of this is, please look at your emotional relationship to food, to stress. And most of us, when we were growing up, weren't taught how to manage stress. And I think it's better now, but most of us also weren't taught what to do with emotions. And if we were taught something, most of us were taught shove them down, just push them all the way down. Don't feel them. It's okay. They won't come back to haunt you and make you physically ill later on, which of course they do.
They do.
So, and eventually, once again, like that's going to catch up to you at some point, especially as our lives just get busier. We have more responsibilities. We have, business, work, families, complicated families, older parents, children, all of these things. It's a lot. I mean, there's a lot that happens, to us as we get older and increases in stress. And so how do you manage that stress? Do you just turn to food? Do you just shove your face full of all kinds of food whenever you're stressed and that's your only coping mechanism? You might want to reevaluate that and take a little bit of a deeper dive into how do we self-soothe, and what techniques and tools do we have in our tool belt outside of just food.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of falls into, the nervous system regulation piece in stress. We know, I mean, there's been studies out there for a long time now showing how detrimental stress is to the body. So being able to regulate those emotions, regulate your nervous system, actually handle stress like in a more positive manner, not just like letting it get to us, shoving things down, that alone is going to do a huge benefit to your body and your health. Because, like I said before, we know that stress is very, very detrimental to the body. So just doing your best to get a handle on that piece is also going to make a huge difference.
Yeah, and it also really impacts our sleep. And sleep also plays a huge role in our health. And, I know it can be really hard, especially if you are a parent and there's a lot of disruptions there. And look, 5 or 6 hours for 98% of the population, maybe more than that, is not enough. And women need more sleep. We need more sleep. Once again, there's plenty of studies showing this, that are out there right now that are good studies, that we just need more sleep. And a lot of this goes back to our hormones and our hormone production and how our hormones work and what does that really look like. And so 7 hours is a minimum. 7 hours of good quality sleep would be a bare minimum. And once again, this is going to catch up to you at some point. If you are sleeping 5 or 6 hours, if you're not getting good quality of sleep, and I know there's a lot of factors that impact sleep, including stress, including the gut, hormones that, going through perimenopause. I mean, that's, a nightmare for most women in their sleep. And it's so important to really dive deep into that and figure out what is impacting your sleep and how do we start supporting the body so that it's not impacting our sleep as much.
Yeah. And if you're someone who maybe you don't even know like what good sleep feels like because you haven't had it yet, it's such a game changer. I mean, this past week, Megan and I just had this conversation today. We both haven't been sleeping super well, energetic stuff. I just got a dog a couple weeks ago, dealing with that. The past week, I have probably slept 5 or 6 hours every night. And I typically get like, 8.5 hours. That's what I feel good at. Huge difference in like my brain function does not feel like it's on point. Like my body just feels like tired. I'm not as strong. So many negative effects just from not getting enough sleep for a couple days. So if you're a person who like, this is how it is for you, that's what you're used to, that is also a really good starting point, is like trying to figure out, hey, how do I get more sleep? Because there's also so many things that are happening in the body while we sleep, like repairing, detoxing, the brain is draining, really beneficial stuff that we need. So that's also a huge piece of this, is making sure we're getting enough sleep and trying to prioritize it the best that you can.
Yes, 100%. And the brain piece here is huge. A lot of people talk about cognitive decline, and I would say some of that normal, natural, and a lot of it is not. And a lot of that has to do with sleep, with nutrition, with movement. And, if there's a supplement for your brain that you want to take, like I know there's a lot, essential fatty acids, yes. And there's also a lot of research, and this is becoming more popular, but lion's mane mushroom. I am such a fan. I personally take it on a daily basis, I notice a big difference in my cognitive health, in being able to focus and concentrate and just be clearer with that. And once again, I'm not saying I'm 100% all the time, but this makes such a big difference. And the studies they've done with people who have cognitive issues, dementia, and Alzheimer's, there's a really incredible and positive benefits that they've seen studying this. And an important piece of this too is the quality of the product. The fruiting body, it seems from studies, plays the biggest role. And most companies do not use just the fruiting bodies. They use other pieces, the mycelium and other pieces of the mushroom. However, it seems that the bulk of the actual benefits from the studies, it seems is actually in the fruiting bodies. I am going to do just a quick plug here. We use real mushrooms, and this is a company that, once again, like any company that we are affiliated with, is a company I truly believe in. There's a 6-month vetting process where I need to try at least 1 or 2 of their products for at least 6 months before I would agree to work with them. I've been using real mushrooms for a very long time, for many years before we became a partner with them. And so they only use the fruiting bodies. They have capsules, they have powders. I'm such a huge fan. Recommend it for a lot of people. I'll also say cordyceps and aging. There's a lot of value and benefit from that. Cordyceps are really good for the lungs. Cordyceps help to carry extra oxygen in the blood, which goes to the body here, which, we could all use a little extra oxygen in our blood. That's not going to hurt most of us here. And so that's going to help with repair, can help with just like energy. Once again, like breathing. If you have a lot of people as they get older have issues with asthma, COPD, different kind of lung and breathing issues, and cordyceps can be another really good option.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's, I have this list in front of us for supplements that we are going to mention, and I wanted to bring up mushrooms. So I'm so glad you said that, especially for the brain health piece. I mean, lion's mane, besides all the studies that are behind it, I also use it myself, and I see a huge difference when I add that in. It is so good for like brain health, mental health. So are the cordyceps are also great too for like an aging supplement. You mentioned the essential fatty acids. So there's a lot of back and forth around this area. We absolutely need it. There's no back and forth in that department, but the quality of the supplement is something that you really want to consider when looking for an essential fatty acid supplement. And honestly, if you're getting enough fats in your diet, getting a really good variety, that's a great starting point. Like the SMAC acronym. So sardines, mackerel, anchovies. I'm blanking on the last one, but making sure you have a good variety of different fats in your diet, that is also a way to get good essential fatty acids in. When it comes to quality of a supplement, what we're most concerned with is like, is the fat rancid by the time it's in the capsule? How are they processing it? Where is it being stored? What type of bottle is it in? If it's ever in like a clear plastic bottle, even a clear glass bottle, those are all indications or like a big red flag that you wouldn't want to buy it, because when light is exposed to it, it's going to oxidize that fat. So if anything, like make sure it's in a dark amber bottle or like you can't see through it at all. Those are just 2 little tips when helping you look for that type of supplement. Typically, there are some professional brands out there that are going to be a little bit better than what you would just buy at the store. Biotics is one that comes to mind, which is a supplement or a company that we use throughout with our clients. Probably Designs for Health. They make pretty good quality supplements. Yeah, those are like the 2 big ones that stick out for me.
Nordic Naturals has some good essential fatty acid, omega-3, like different ones like that I have I've used in the past and recommend, and those are good quality by and large. So, but also make sure, something to think about, if you buy something at a grocery store, real question mark. If you buy something on Amazon, real question mark. How long have they had it? How has it been stored? What does that look like? Like those are all really big factors when you think about supplements here. I also want to talk about calcium. So when
How
it
can
comes
we
to
not?
bone, yeah, and we could probably do a whole episode on this, but most people don't need calcium as they get older. Most people with their bone issues, it's not a calcium issue. It's a cofactor issue. That's really the issue. And so this is why it's really important to run tests and actually look at nutrient status to see, are you deficient in calcium? Even if you are deficient in calcium, what other nutrients may you be deficient in? And that plays a really big role here. The cofactors of the calcium are it's like 90+% of the time is really the issue. And if calcium is really an issue, like a lot of times it's actually like a parathyroid type issue. That's not a calcium issue, it's a parathyroid issue that's causing calcium to leak out. And so the question is, okay, well, what's impacting the parathyroid versus just addressing the calcium leaking out?
Yeah. Yeah. Calcium is, and like the quality of that supplement as well. I mean, I know there's, obviously we get calcium from certain foods, and that's going to be the best way for our body to absorb it and actually like the most bioavailable form. There are certain supplements out there that are, you can get a decent amount of food-based calcium, but you're also going to get this in, well, I'll just go ahead and say one of the other supplements that we do recommend taking, even now, like, in your younger years, just because we can't get as many nutrients from food as we used to, just like a good quality multivitamin. And Megan and I, we switch back and forth between a prenatal vitamin and like a multivitamin, and you're going to get some calcium in there. Of course, you're getting other nutrients in there. So you have that. But realistically, like if we're eating a pretty good diet, or maybe we look for like a food-based calcium, if we do want to add in a calcium supplement, that is going to be an easier form for the body to know what to do with.
Yeah, and I don't think I've ever recommended calcium by itself. I've always recommended it in the form with other things. And if you look at, we use Fullscript by and large for a lot of our supplements, and which is a wholesale supplement distributor. It's not like we're loyal to one brand or another. We do have some of our favorite brands. And, if you look at, I think about Biotics, they have a one that's helps with people who have been diagnosed with osteopenia or osteoporosis that help rebuild bones. There's calcium in there, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff in there because it's not just about the calcium. It's about the calcium plus, once again, like all of the cofactors, like all these other factors that play a really big role in just our overall bone health and being able to maintain.
Yeah, definitely. So, I would say that's a pretty good take on the calcium department for what we're talking about. As far as like the multivitamin goes, we like to use Seeking Health is a good quality brand that we love. Designs for Health has a pretty good multivitamin. And there's definitely some other companies out there that also make great quality multivitamins. Those are just the two that we tend to recommend the most often. We use them. We like those ones. We see shifts with them. So of course, that's going to be the one that we recommend. The other important thing that I just want to touch on really quick. Oh, go ahead.
Real quick before you talk about that. I also want to share that in our multivitamins, they do not have iron in them on purpose. And most people do not need iron. And I know we've mentioned this a couple of times before, but this is really important. And if you are deficient in iron, usually we're going to recommend something else that has, once again, it's not just about the iron, it's about iron plus all of the nutrients required to absorb the iron. So it's really important. And this is a big reason why a lot of people get sick on straight up iron supplements, because their body can't use it. Because it's not like they're just deficient in iron. It's iron plus all of the nutrients, which is quite the handful of nutrients that are also required to absorb it. So the multivitamins that we recommend do not have iron in them on purpose.
Yes. Very, very important piece, just because the majority of us, like we've talked about this before, but you definitely need to see your actual iron markers before we add iron in, because it can do a lot of damage to the body, super hard on the liver. So yeah, glad you brought that up. Yeah, the other thing is just minerals and hydration. So a lot of us, we know it's super important to stay hydrated and drink water, but if we don't have the minerals with it, then the body isn't actually absorbing the water and getting fully hydrated. So for most of us, it doesn't hurt to add in some extra minerals. And this can be something as simple as getting a good quality sea salt and putting a little pinch in your water. You're going to get your sodium, a little bit of magnesium, potassium, the major minerals. And that's super, super important to actually stay hydrated. I can't tell you how many times I've come across people who are drinking like 100 ounces of water a day, and they're not adding in any minerals, and they're saying, I'm peeing super frequently, and it's because you're not actually getting hydrated and absorbing the water. So the minerals piece, of course, there's other benefits to minerals as well, but it's also really important for hydration.
Yeah, and I just want to put a little side note on this, because I know a lot of people are still recommending this, of like in the morning having a glass of warm water with like half of a lemon or half of a lime and a pinch of sea salt, or just like straight up lemon water, which lemon and lime do have potassium, and then you get the sodium with the salt. Good. And also keep in mind that if you have lemon water every day, probably going to start to notice some things going wrong with your teeth. Because the lemon water, the acidity of that, if you're having it every day, now if you're having it once in a while, if you're sick, like different story here. I'm talking people who do this for years, every single day, your enamel is going to start to go, and you're going to start to have some dental issues. So please keep that in mind. That is not something we recommend every day. Yes, you can do it on occasion, and just be very, very mindful of that. I know it's promoted for electrolytes, but also for liver health, liver support, and it can do a lot of damage too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely something to be mindful about with the acidic, adding in the acidity piece, like with the lemon and the lime to your teeth. That's pretty important too. As far as supplements go, in addition to good quality food, I would say those are probably like the 4 major things that I would focus on. Unless we need to add something in for sleep, then we could go that route. But is there any other big supplements that you think go with this?
I don't think so. And I think, I also want to make sure, like, keep in mind, supplements only do so much. We also need to be mindful that, look, like your liver has to process any supplement that you're on, any medication that you're on. It's helping to regulate blood sugar. It's helping to get out toxins and anything that should be in your body. It's helping to get out of your body. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at, once again, we see people on like a handful of medications and then on a whole bunch of supplements. And, at that point, do you just have really expensive urine? Probably. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a good point. We didn't really touch on that, but just really quick, it is pretty common in our society. The older that we get, we're taking more medications. Certain medications do deplete vitamins, minerals from the body. They mess with the normal functions in general. So that in that sense, if you are someone who's taking a couple of medications, that's something really interesting to look up too. Is, you can do some research and find out like what nutrients are being depleted the most, and then maybe focusing on making sure you're replacing those in your body as well.
Yeah. And then I also want to circle back to specifically the cholesterol piece here, because once again, I think this is something that many people are just kind of put on as we get older. And here's something really interesting about cholesterol. As we age, our cholesterol is supposed to increase. Women, our cholesterol is supposed to be higher. So cholesterol is probably, and I'm running through my head right now, I think this is probably the only set of markers where our range is actually by and large bigger and larger than Western medicines. And a lot of this is dependent on age and gender. Because once again, as we get older, our cholesterol should increase. And as women, our cholesterol should be higher. Also, please keep in mind, and I know this is still going to be a shock for a lot of people, but dietary cholesterol does not impact our cholesterol markers as they are measured in Western medicine for over 90% of the people. There is a handful of people that do have a genetic predisposition where we do want to look at saturated fat intake, but you have to run a marker that's called lipoprotein little a. That is the only marker that will show us that you have a true genetic predisposition to reacting to needing to look at your saturated fat intake. Just because your parents were on cholesterol meds, just because your parents were on cholesterol meds, does not mean you are genetically predisposed to having high cholesterol. So please keep that in mind, that if you do suspect, and we went over this on the blood testing, I think the second blood testing episode, of if you have quote unquote high cholesterol and they're thinking about putting you on meds, ask to have an NMR lipoprofile test run. A regular physician can run it. A cardiologist definitely can run it and read it. And so that's actually going to be a better indication of what's going on inside of your blood vessels with the lipoproteins versus just like total cholesterol, LDL, HDL, triglycerides. There's also like cholesterol is good. We should have it. We need to have enough of it for health. Too much, yes, is also not good. There's a lot of things that impact cholesterol markers, including gut health, including inflammation in the body. So those all need to be taken into account.
Yeah. And cholesterol is a really big piece. I mean, I'm pretty sure the top range of our marker is like 260 for if you're over a certain age. I can't think of it right now, but yeah, that's by and large, that is one of those big areas where before you take medication, like please, please, please advocate for yourself and just like ask questions. Do a little bit of research on your own so you can try and understand it more. We certainly have like a couple episodes where we talk about like cholesterol and toxins and inflammation in the body. Use those as resources just before you willy-nilly accept and go on it, because there are certain side effects and, things that maybe aren't great for our body from taking those medications.
Yeah, and I would say, if we think about some of these other big medications that many people are put on, and once again, not saying don't go on these, it's ask some more questions, maybe before you're on these things long term. When we think about blood pressure issues, most people who have blood pressure issues have a mineral balancing issue. And like balancing those minerals, and that's different for everyone. Just by the way, we can't give you like a blanket, kind of like, this is what mineral you're missing, or low or high. But blood pressure is often regulated in more of the mineral balancing space. That's another really big one. I'm trying to think if we think about like diabetes, blood pressure, blood sugar management, there's a lot of things that go into that. Certainly nutrition, stress, what we're feeling our body, toxin load, inflammation, gut health. Like these are all things that really impact blood sugar. And if you don't want to get on medication and you are open to making some changes and lifestyle, dietary changes, changes in your relationship to stress, that can go a really long way, and that can help people. We've certainly seen people be able to come off of medications. We've seen people not have to go on medication. So those are just some things to think about.
Yeah, by and large, lowering inflammation in the body is like a really big piece of this. And by doing a ton of these things that we talked about today, or even taking baby steps and starting with a few, you will definitely impact, if you don't have like major toxin issues going on in your body, you can definitely shift the marker on what that inflammation looks like for yourself.
Yeah. And, another thing I'm just like, as we keep talking, I'm like, oh, here's another thing I often see with more, people in an advanced age of taking like a turmeric, or curcumin based supplement for inflammation. And while there's nothing wrong with that in general, for us, like we always go back to one, how much stuff are you on? And can your liver process all of this stuff? With inflammation in particular, inflammation is a side effect. It's a symptom. It's not a root cause. Inflammation isn't the root cause of whatever issue you have. The question is, okay, but why are you inflamed? Like, what's going on? Why do you have this inflammation? And there's usually not one answer. It's usually several things, but those are just some things to think about of like, okay, cool, I have inflammation. I'm losing my hair, my skin is getting thinner. But why? What's going on? What's contributing to this? And not, once again, there's not a right or a wrong answer here. And if you want to stay off medication, if you want to stay off certain supplements, there often is dietary and or lifestyle changes that can be made to help you feel better and to bring your body into a better balance.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I know our main clientele, we are helping people with like detoxing from bigger toxin issues, but not everyone has something that big going on. In just these shifts with like these lifestyle changes, like, more movement, getting more protein in, making sure you're hydrated, that alone, the nervous system piece, those are things that you can start to do on your own that will make a huge shift in your body. And then again, I know we've talked about this a lot before too, but liver support is another thing to throw in here that's super, super important, just because the liver plays such a large role in, so many things, hormones in the body. We need getting toxins out of the liver, plays a role with like cholesterol imbalances and whatnot. So we want to give our liver some extra support as well. Generally, we are exposed to toxins. It's just part of life. That's how it is. So the more support that we can give our body and our liver to process those things out, the better things are going to be internally.
Yeah, and just one little extra thing on the nervous system regulation piece. And once again, I know we've mentioned this at least in the nervous system regulation episode, and that if you have childhood trauma, and if you're in your 60s or 70s or 80s, like, please look at this, because I've worked with enough clients in that population where they're like, my childhood was fine, I'm over it, I've dealt with it. And not really. Your body remembers. Your body is carrying that. I mean, the studies are really clear that if you had childhood trauma, which, by the way, is most of us, not saying our parents are bad, it's just a lot can happen in our childhood, and we can internalize a lot in our childhood. But there are studies showing that if you score, I think it's a 2 or higher on the ACEs test, the Adverse Childhood Experiences test, or higher, your inflammation levels naturally are going to be higher as an adult. And this is because you haven't processed that trauma and your body's still holding onto it. That's driving up actual like blood test inflammation markers. And looking back, processing, and there's a lot of ways to do that, but going back and actually processing a lot of that childhood trauma, that can go a really long way in obviously our mental and emotional health, but really also in our physical health as well.
Yeah, major piece for anyone on their healing journey, starting to address that stuff, which we all do have a little bit of it. It certainly looks different for everyone. But yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up. That's a very important piece to this. Also tends to be the tougher thing to address, because it's really easy to, well, not really easy, but to change up your food, to take supplements, but to actually dive deeper into that mental health side of things, the trauma stuff, that tends to be the more difficult piece. But it's also necessary if you're looking for like that deep change within your body.
Yeah. And it takes a lot of courage to really look at yourself and to do that type of deeper inner work. And it's not for the faint of heart by any stretch of the imagination. And also the benefits are unbelievable, out of this world. So worth it. And it can also be a lot while you're going through it. And we continue to go through it and experience, and you learn, once again, like you learn how to ride the waves of it. But that it really does play a really, really big role. Once again, especially as stress naturally increases as we age, as our just responsibilities increase, we're carrying more. And if we have a lot of unprocessed trauma, unprocessed stress, unprocessed emotions, it's going to come up eventually. And it's just a matter of when. And the sooner that you can care for that side of yourself, the better you're going to be, just longer term. And, for me, like I always think, not to get too deep into this here, but, just seeing a lot of my friends and spending a lot of time in like healing circles, healing spaces with older women, there's so much gratitude for me doing this in my 30s, and having started in my late 20s, really like mid to late 20s, and just getting into it so young. Like, gosh, like how incredible, like how much difference it makes in just, my life. And, obviously my life has changed a lot this year, and, being, feeling, more like way more regulated than having my entire life, and then you get to reap those benefits.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, the earlier you can start specifically with this stuff or any of this stuff, the better. I mean, I've had similar experiences where I've had like different practitioners that I'm working with, that were older than I was. And that is something that people always pointed out, is like, you're really lucky that you started as young as you did, like working on some of this bigger stuff, because it's going to change what your life looks like in the future. I mean, it changes how you raise your kids, how you interact with your family, how you take care of yourself. This is such a big piece. And it is scary. And like, again, starting with baby steps is like the best advice that we can give, is starting really small and then kind of just continuing to explore and work your way through it.
Yeah. And then the last piece I just want to say is, you are also never too old to start. I don't care if you are 100 years old, it is still never too late to start, to shift, to make changes. And you can see benefit no matter how old you are when you start this process. So also, I don't want people to be discouraged, being like, well, I'm already in my 60s, 70s, 80s plus. Is it too late? No, it is never too late. And you can see incredible benefit, especially in just some really like day-to-day lifestyle type of things. And just feeling a little bit better as you move through your life. So you're never too old. You're also never too young to start doing any of this type of work.
Yes. Could not agree more.
Awesome. Well, that is our topic on aging here. Thank you for joining. Super fun to talk about this. As always, please like, subscribe, follow if it resonates. A 5-star review really, really, really means a lot to us. And thank you for joining, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone. See you next time.